My parents constantly criticized me, labeling me the black sheep of the family. To escape that, I moved out to forge my own path. But years later, when I showed up at my grandfather's 80th birthday, my parents mocked me and tried to send me away, saying, "People can't know you're still a failure." As I left, I made a public statement, and now they're filled with regret. Growing up, I always felt overshadowed by my older brother, Mark. He embodied everything my parents seemed to value: academic brilliance, self-discipline, and consistently flawless grades. Mark's natural determination and focus made him appear perfect in their eyes. Meanwhile, I was the complete opposite. School was a struggle. I procrastinated until the last second, and I was constantly forgetful. These problems didn't stop at academics. They affected all parts of my life, making me feel like I would never measure up. I didn't understand why I was this way, and I believed I was just lazy or incapable. It wasn't until much later that everything finally made sense. I was diagnosed with ADHD. That diagnosis was a breakthrough. Suddenly, all the struggles and frustrations of my childhood clicked into place. Every symptom, from my difficulty concentrating to my chronic procrastination, perfectly aligned with ADHD. With medication and other tools, I managed to turn my life around and gained a sense of control I never thought possible. But back then, as a child, there was no diagnosis, no understanding, and no support. My parents only saw my flaws. For context, my parents were both highly accomplished, respected in their fields, and held prestigious jobs. Naturally, they expected their children to achieve the same level of success. Mark met those expectations effortlessly, but I was seen as the difficult child. In their eyes, I lacked effort, discipline, and worth. They constantly compared me to Mark, their golden child, which only widened the gap between my brother and me. These comparisons hurt more than they knew, making me feel like being different was somehow wrong. Mark didn't make my childhood easier. We attended the same school, and I always felt trapped in his shadow. If I missed deadlines or got into trouble, he would scold me harshly, saying how ashamed he was to have a loser for a sibling. His words cut deep, especially since he was someone I was supposed to admire. At home, he would tell our parents about even the smallest things, like me socializing instead of studying. He was always looking for ways to prove he was the better child. I think part of his behavior came from the fact that, unlike me, Mark had no friends. He was a classic know-it-all, always acting superior and ready to criticize anyone for the smallest error. Unsurprisingly, people didn't like him. He isolated himself and, rather than reflecting on why, he just leaned further into his arrogance. Yet, my parents adored him. They never corrected his behavior or encouraged him to be kinder. Instead, they celebrated him as if he could do no wrong. They bragged about him to anyone who would listen, at family gatherings, at work, and to neighbors. Every year, they threw elaborate birthday parties for Mark, complete with fancy decorations, guests, and expensive gifts. They made it clear that Mark was worth celebrating because, in their words, he was the one good thing to come from their marriage. Imagine hearing your parents say that about your sibling, as if you were worthless in comparison. My birthdays, on the other hand, were barely acknowledged. There were no parties or excitement. I received the same predictable gift every year: books, and not the fun, imaginative kind. Always educational books that screamed, "You need to work harder." When my brother graduated from college, it was a huge event for my family. He had been accepted to one of the country's top universities, and my parents were ecstatic. They bragged endlessly about his accomplishments. 2 years later, when I graduated, it was a completely different story. I got into an average university, not one with the prestige of marks. My parents' disappointment was obvious. My father didn't even try to hide it, bluntly telling me he had no hope for me anymore. He said he wanted me out of their lives because he was too embarrassed to tell relatives where I was going. Those words devastated me. To hear your own father essentially disown you just because you didn't meet impossible standards is a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. My parents labeled me the black sheep of the family, saying they regretted having me, and that raising me was a waste of time and resources. Mark made it clear he was disgusted by my college choice. He told me that, while he didn't expect me to reach his level of success, I should have at least tried harder. His words stung deeply. To them, I was never good enough. My best efforts were never enough for them. Their words and attitudes hurt me so deeply that I made a decision on the spot. If they truly believed I wasn't worth their time or love, I would do them a favor and cut ties. I refused to stay in an environment that only tore me down. I vowed to create my own path, no matter how challenging it would be, and not look back. Starting college marked a new beginning, but it brought its own struggles. I had to take out a student loan to cover tuition and worked part-time to support myself. Juggling a job, studies, and managing my ADHD was incredibly tough. There were moments I felt like quitting, but I didn't. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who believed in me, friends who supported and encouraged me, focusing on my strengths instead of my weaknesses. With their help and the right medication to manage my ADHD, I started building a life that felt worthwhile and satisfying. Today, I work as an AI solutions architect at a leading multinational company, a role I've held for 9 years. During this time, I've had no contact with my parents or brother, nor have I kept up with their lives. I worked hard to distance myself from that painful chapter. I usually avoid family gatherings to steer clear of any potential encounters with my parents or Mark. However, this time was different. It was my grandfather's 80th birthday party. He personally called and pleaded with me to come. I hadn't seen him in years, and he was one of the few family members who had always been kind to me. I couldn't handle the guilt of disappointing him on such an important day. Against my better judgment, I decided to attend. When I got to the party, I saw that my parents were already there. I had expected it, but seeing them after so long stirred up old feelings I wasn't fully ready to face. Despite those emotions, I reminded myself that I was there for my granddad. I greeted him quietly with a hug, then spent time chatting with other relatives, exchanging polite words and smiles with family members who were genuinely glad to see me. Many hadn't seen me in nearly 10 years, and they were eager to catch up. Then my parents noticed me. Their stunned expressions showed they couldn't believe I was actually there. Almost immediately, my mom approached with a blank expression and asked to speak with me privately. I nodded, and she led me away from the main area to a quieter corner, away from curious onlookers. From the start, my parents made it obvious they weren't happy to see me. There were no polite greetings or any sign of reconciliation. My mom's first question was harsh and direct. "Why are you here?" I calmly explained that my granddad had personally invited me, and I couldn't ignore his request to celebrate his 80th birthday. My dad wasn't satisfied with that answer. He questioned why I hadn't come to any of my granddad's previous birthday celebrations or other family events, and implied I was using this as an excuse to reconnect with them. His accusations infuriated me, but I stayed composed. I told them directly that I had no desire to reconnect. I didn't need their approval to attend my grandfather's party. If they were so upset by my presence, they could go back to pretending I didn't exist and leave me alone to socialize with others. My dad argued that they wished they could ignore me, but people would start asking questions. He said I should have warned them so they could have prepared to answer inquiries about me. He acted as though I had committed a crime just by showing up. I told him they could simply say I was doing well, that I had a successful career and a supportive partner. My mom laughed mockingly and said, "Do you really expect us to believe you have a successful career? You didn't even graduate from a decent college." A surge of anger welled up inside me. I had built my career from nothing, overcoming countless obstacles, and yet she dismissed my achievements with one sentence. Before I could respond, she pointed to the door and coldly said, "You should leave. People can't know you're still a failure." I was stunned. Who did they think they were to ask me to leave a party that wasn't about them? How could they still treat me like this? They were so obsessed with maintaining their image and appearing superior to others. Their cruel, dismissive words made me realize they still saw me as the same child they could control. But I wasn't that person anymore. If they were so worried about appearances, I decided it was time to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. Without hesitation, I brushed past them and returned to where the guests were gathered. My granddad noticed immediately that something was wrong and came over to check on me. I didn't hold back. I told him everything. What my parents had said, how they tried to make me leave, and how ashamed they were of me. Hearing this, my granddad was furious. He assured me that my parents had no right to treat me that way, especially not on his birthday, by creating unnecessary drama. He offered to talk to them for me, but I explained it wouldn't change anything. What we really needed was to reveal the truth openly. Fortunately, my granddad agreed with me. I raised my glass and tapped it gently to catch everyone's attention. The room went quiet, and all eyes turned toward me. Taking a deep breath, I steadied my voice and began by congratulating my granddad on reaching such a significant milestone. I expressed my gratitude for his invitation and shared how much it meant to be there, celebrating with him. Then I shifted focus and mentioned how wonderful it was to see so many family members again after so long. But I also took the opportunity to explain why I had stayed away from these gatherings for nearly 10 years. "I'm sure many of you have wondered why I've avoided family events all these years," I said. "So, I'm going to be honest with you. The reason is my parents." I explained that my parents had always treated me like I was inferior, making me feel like a burden rather than a valued family member. I laid everything out, sharing how my parents had excluded me and constantly made me feel inadequate, labeling me a failure simply because I didn't meet their unrealistic standards. I recounted how I had paid for my own education through loans and part-time jobs without any support from them. I made it clear that, despite my hard work to create a meaningful life, they had never once reached out to see how I was doing. The room was silent as I spoke. Some people exchanged uneasy glances, while others looked at my parents, who appeared humiliated. My father's face was pale, and my mother looked furious. But I didn't stop there. I revealed how, throughout my childhood, my parents had shown clear favoritism toward Mark, showering him with attention, love, and opportunities, while casting me as the family's black sheep. I described how their constant comparisons and harsh treatment drove a wedge between us. I explained how they dismissed my struggles with ADHD as mere laziness, never offering understanding or support. I continued, saying that even now, as an adult who had built a successful life, I didn't expect my parents to suddenly accept me. However, I also hadn't expected them to criticize me for attending my own granddad's birthday party, an event I had been personally invited to. Their behavior was ridiculous and hurtful, and I wanted everyone to understand just how absurd it was. For those wondering why I've been absent from family gatherings, I said, I wasn't being rude or distant. I was protecting myself trying to heal from years of emotional damage. Yet, today, when I came for my granddad's sake, my parents wanted me gone. They claim they don't want to answer questions about me because they're ashamed. That's why I'm addressing this here, now, in front of everyone. I'm done hiding. I'm done letting them make me feel like the problem. From now on, I'll attend every family event, whether they like it or not. As I finished my speech, my granddad and a few cousins cheered and came over to hug me, showing their support. My parents, however, stood frozen, unable to defend themselves now that the truth was out. For years they had controlled the story, but now everyone saw the reality of their behavior. Clearly embarrassed, my parents left the party soon after, while I stayed behind, enjoying time with my cousins and other relatives. In the days following the event, several family members reached out to express their support, praising me for speaking up. Some said I had shown great bravery by confronting the unfair treatment I'd endured for so long. A few even apologized for not recognizing my struggles earlier or for not reaching out sooner. However, not everyone agreed with how I handled it. A handful of relatives thought I should have kept the matter private, saying that publicly calling out my parents and humiliating them went too far. To those asking for an update on Reddit, I want to say your kind comments have meant so much to me. I'm truly overwhelmed by the number of people who checked on my well-being. Mentally, I'm okay. Throughout my childhood, I grew used to my parents treating me poorly. It hurt deeply, and I carried that pain for years. But as I grew older, I learned to defend myself. The moment at the party was the result of years of bottled-up emotions and truths I had suppressed. Honestly, I'm glad I finally spoke out. I have no regrets about telling my side of the story. For those curious about Mark's absence, he wasn't at the party. One of my cousins told me he was away on a work trip. I was relieved. If he had been there, he likely would have taken my parents' side and said something hurtful. Mark has always been quick to criticize and belittle me, so his absence felt like a small mercy. Some of you have asked why I didn't seek financial help from other relatives when my parents refused to support me. The truth is, at the time, I was young, naive, and easily swayed by their words. When my parents and Mark mocked me, called me a failure, belittled my college choice, and questioned my dreams, I believed them. I felt an overwhelming sense of shame at the idea of exposing our family issues publicly. The fear of being rejected even more was paralyzing. My pride also played a part, so I resolved to manage everything on my own, no matter how hard it was. Regarding my granddad, I want to highlight that he has always supported me in his own way. Though he wasn't financially stable enough to help with my college costs, his emotional support meant everything. He always believed in me and understood the complicated relationship between me and my parents. He knew the whole story and never judged me for cutting ties. I am incredibly grateful to him for allowing me to speak at his party and for standing by me when I decided to reveal my parents' true nature. Since that day, I've learned that my parents are facing significant backlash from relatives who were shocked to discover how cruel they had been. Many of these family members had no idea how bad things were because my parents had always portrayed me as the problem child. They crafted this image to protect their own reputation, hiding their toxic behavior. Now that the truth is out, their carefully maintained facade is finally collapsing. I can only hope that this public humiliation serves as a wake-up call, making them reconsider their actions. But even if it doesn't, I have spoken my truth and found some closure. Update 2. This week, Mark contacted me. After hearing about the incident from our parents and other relatives, he called me. The moment I answered, he started shouting, furious about what had happened. He couldn't believe I had the nerve to expose our parents in front of everyone. He accused me of seeking attention and claimed my actions were selfish. According to him, I had no right to air our family's private matters, especially since our parents had been trying to move on without me for years. He kept ranting about how I was destroying the fragile peace that had been established and insisted I should just let the past go. He demanded, "What do you want from them? An apology? Really? Just because they didn't pay for your college? Because they were disappointed in you? Because they pushed you to do better?" I couldn't help but scoff. Mark had always supported our parents, no matter how badly they treated me. He never understood my pain, dismissing it as typical family drama. Pretending everything was fine was easier for him than confronting the reality. I told him that pushing someone to improve doesn't mean shaming or mocking them for years when they fall short. What I needed wasn't more pressure. It was love, support, and understanding. I explained how I wished our parents had accepted me for who I was and helped me deal with my challenges instead of constantly criticizing me for failing to meet their unrealistic standards. I didn't ask for a perfect childhood, I just wanted parents who cared about me, not ones who saw me as a disappointment. Mark argued that if I felt this way, I should have dealt with it privately instead of exposing our parents publicly. He said they had worked hard to build their reputation, and now all anyone could talk about was how badly they treated me. He questioned if it was worth it, suggesting that I was bitter because they had been right all along. He implied that my lack of accomplishments was the reason I went after our parents. I laughed at his accusation and calmly explained that, despite everything our parents and he had put me through, I had built a successful career. My decision to expose them wasn't about proving myself or humiliating them. It was about taking control of my story after years of being ignored and dismissed. I had been cast aside and made to feel like the problem. But the reality was that I was the one who had been wronged. Speaking out wasn't about showing off my success. It was about standing up for myself and revealing what had been happening behind closed doors. Mark refused to back down, insisting I needed to apologize publicly to restore our parents' reputation. I cut him off and bluntly told him I would never do that. Why should I apologize when I was the one who had been hurt? I told him to stop defending people who had treated me horribly my whole life. To frustrate him further, I said I would attend every family event from now on, no matter how much it bothered him or our parents. If they confronted me again, I would continue to expose them. Why should their toxic behavior control my relationships with the rest of the family? He accused me of doing this just to make our parents miserable and demanded I go back to cutting off contact, like I had for years. I sighed, realizing we would never see eye to eye. I told him to stay out of my business and mind his own life. I wasn't going to put up with his attempts to justify our parents' actions or make excuses for them anymore. Then, I ended the call and blocked his number. In the end, I didn't owe him anything. No explanations, no apologies. Update 3. I wanted to provide a quick update on what's happened over the past 4 months. First, I've made a deliberate effort to be more active in family life. I make it a point to attend every family event, whether it's a major celebration, like a birthday or anniversary, or a smaller, casual get-together. Besides that, I've been visiting my granddad more frequently, making sure to check in on him regularly. I've also been spending more time with my cousins. Whenever someone suggests plans, whether it's grabbing a bite, watching a movie, or doing something fun together, I prioritize joining in. It's been wonderful to rebuild those connections and create new memories with them. Last month, my dad finally apologized. Since I had blocked both my parents on my phone, he reached out to me through email. He explained that he had been going to therapy and reflecting a lot on the past. He acknowledged that he and my mom had favored my brother over me, and justified it by saying they grew up in strict, academically demanding families. Because of that upbringing, they expected both Mark and me to meet the same high standards. He shared that hearing me speak up at my granddad's party and learning about my ADHD had been a wake-up call for him. He confessed that after that day, he did his own research and realized that I genuinely had ADHD. He admitted feeling guilty for not recognizing the signs earlier and for failing to support me when I needed it most as a child. In the email, he also mentioned that he had been quietly following my career on LinkedIn over the past few months. He expressed how proud he was of everything I've achieved. At the end of his message, he brought up my mom, saying that she was aware of my accomplishments too. However, he acknowledged that she is a very prideful person and might need more time before she's ready to apologize. Honestly, I'm still in shock that my dad wrote all of that. If he had shown this level of understanding when I was younger, my childhood could have been completely different. That being said, despite his email, I haven't unblocked him or my mom. I'm just not ready to forgive them yet.